Hey, what's going on, gang? Nate on the Stone here. Welcome back to my channel and to the 87th edition of the Rolling Stone. Hope that you are all doing well, staying as safe and as free as you can in the ever-changing, ever-mutating, brave new world that we find ourselves in. And I was actually, this past week, I was trying to think of a suitable analogy with which to describe the world that we now inhabit. And my mind went to a book that, in all honesty, I've only read bits and snatches of it, which was Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland, particularly the mad trial scene, which you all might be best familiar with from the 1950 Walt Disney animated version of Alice in Wonderland, where the Queen of Hearts has put Alice on trial for some such made-up crime, a crime that she herself just made right at the moment. And I think that the mad trial is the more I thought about it, the more that seemed apropos for this brave new world. The world doesn't run on facts, logic, truth, or even simple common sense anymore. Hasn't for a long time, really, but the veneer was still there. Now the veneer is gone, and the ruling caste is letting you all know that the world runs on raw power, their raw power. And if you want to be left alone, then at the very, very least, you have to keep your head down and shut up about everything and just nod your head whenever any of them talk. And if you really want to actually thrive in this new world, if you really want to do that, then you have to basically rip your soul out from your body, hand it over to them, don't bother insuring it or getting a receipt because it's theirs for life after that, and then you can join the club. You can join the left's club, and you might be able, to get a somewhat better job. You might be able to, thrive a little bit in the world. And that actually brings us to our very first story, which has as its central character Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I was thinking today that it's been far too long since we had a story that featured our dear friend AOC, and so we are going to correct that right here and right now. But before I actually get into the meat and potatoes of this story, I have to lay out a little bit of a groundwork here. So if you saw the regular On the Stone video, which actually did get posted this week, hallelujah, I very briefly mentioned the slight kerfuffle that happened on Wall Street. What was it, a week and a half, almost 2 weeks ago now, where a bunch of feisty commoners, as I called them, all congregating on Reddit, actually played a trick on the stock market. They all bought stock, and that was, dirt cheap. GameStop, the company that still is struggling along and that sells video games, AMC theaters, and then they didn't sell it. They bought more and more and more of the stocks, which actually forced the stocks to increase in price. And this caused just a huge kerfuffle on Wall Street. And part of that story, an addendum to that story, was that the Robinhood app, which is a purportedly free investment app, which allows regular Joes like you and I to play the stock market without knowing a thing about Wall Street. It's for the common man, as its name suggests. It announced, or it decreed, that its users who had GameStop or AMC stock, they wouldn't be able to buy more of that stock. They wouldn't be able to buy more, which coincidentally means that the price of that stock would continue to go up. No, instead they were only going to be given the option to sell the stock. And this caused a huge kerfuffle over in Washington, D.C. It was actually rather astounding to see. It was the most unity between both sides of the political chasm that I think a lot of people had seen in many, 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 many moons. You had people on the left and people on the right both agreeing that Robinhood needed to be invested, or at the very least, Robinhood needed to provide an explanation as to why it was decreeing arbitrarily, why its users were not able to buy and sell certain stock, which they owned. They had bought it, right? And since they weren't trying to do anything quote unquote illegal, they were simply trying to buy and or sell more stock, why had they inserted their finger, or in this case their arrow, or their little, Chinese manufactured feathered hat into people's business in that sense? And this is actually where the story happens, because one of the voices on the left who said that Robinhood needed to explain itself was our old friend AOC. And she made this statement on Twitter, as of course all important statements now are made on Twitter. And one of the people on the right who actually agreed with her was Ted Cruz, the senator from Texas. He retweeted her and simply said, fully agree. And we had the pointing hand emoji, the downward pointing hand emoji down, which directed the eyes and the attention, of course, to her original tweet. In response to that, AOC did not do the gracious thing, didn't do the strategic thing in a sense, didn't do even what the natural thing would be to say, oh yeah, you know what, we actually agree for once. Didn't rejoice in the fact, didn't even make a joke about it. This is what she said instead on Twitter, quote, "I'm happy to work with Republicans on this issue where there's common ground, but you, Ted Cruz, almost had me murdered 3 weeks ago, so you can sit this one out. Happy to work with almost any other GOP that aren't trying to get me killed. In the meantime, if you want to help, you can resign." And when she put out that tweet, which, by the by, garnered almost 800,000 likes on Twitter. That tweet almost got 1 million likes on Twitter. Everyone sort of shook themselves asleep, right? We had all been going along, plodding along. Yeah, politics are usual. Even the new abnormality was becoming normal for us in our minds. But this kind of shook everyone up. What the hey? What the what? And so people were actually starting to tell AOC, hey, this is way over the line. Because, of course, the reason why she said that Ted Cruz had tried to get her murdered was because Ted Cruz had the gall, along with that other ne'er-do-well, Senator Josh Hawley from Missouri. They had the nerve, the gall, the audacity to challenge the 2020 election on the floor of the Senate. They said, hey, things do not add up. Things do not add up. We need to audit this election to make sure that it was fair and free. Because the integrity of the vote, the integrity of the system by which we, the citizen legislators of this supposed republic, actually choose who our representatives, who our lawmakers, who our leaders are going to be. We've got to make sure everything is on the up and up. And there are just too many historical firsts. There are too many just bizarre things that seem to coincide all at once here. So that's what they were doing, which, by the by, is the exact same thing that the left did during the 2017 election. When Joe Biden, who was then the vice president, was overseeing the Senate, counting the electoral votes, he was interrupted no less than 11 times, all by Democrats challenging the integrity and the validity of the 2016, I should say, presidential election. So Cruz and Hawley simply exercising a power that is there for every sitting member of Congress. Any member of Congress can challenge the election. Simply for doing that, the line of logic goes, remember what I said about Alice in Wonderland, the line of logic goes that because Hawley and Cruz challenged the election, they are actually personally responsible for the January 6th storming of the Capitol. And at the very least, if they had any sort of morality, any sort of decency, they should resign. At the very most, they should be expelled, both from the Senate and then brought up on charges of sedition. This is the narrative now. And this is a narrative that is not just on the left. This is on the right as well. There was David French, who is a man now personally that I cannot stand because he has... The ideology has rotted his brain like a cabbage left out in the summer sun. He retweeted, I remember, a picture of Josh Hawley walking into the Senate, giving a fist bump, an air fist bump to protesters outside of the Senate. Remember, this is when Hawley was going into the Senate. This was before the storming. This is when people were just exercising their First Amendment rights to peacefully assemble, peacefully petition, and peacefully protest. That's all that they were doing. David French tweeted out that picture and said, well, if there's any justice in the world, this will be the end of Hawley's career. For doing what? For acknowledging peaceful protesters? So this narrative is on both sides. All the people who have an ideological axe to grind, they have swallowed this narrative hook, line, and sinker because it's just so damn convenient for them. So that's where the situation stands. And when AOC publicly accused Ted Cruz of being an attempted murderer, people were starting to say that's going a little bit too far. And people on the right, especially, or in the GOP, were saying you need to move on, AOC, okay? That was 3 weeks ago. Nothing happened, okay? Well, I mean, Ashley Babbitt, the Air Force veteran, the young lady female Air Force veteran, she was killed. But you know what? She was a Nazi. She was a terrorist, which is actually what people on the left were saying about her. So other than that, her death doesn't matter. But other than that, nothing happened. Nothing happened. You had a bunch of mindless ant-like people, in the Capitol, kind of rummaging around, taking selfies, stealing podiums, and that was about it. No congressman was killed. No congressman was shot at. No congressman, I believe, was even in any imminent danger. It wasn't like back in 2017 when Steve Scalise was shot at by that Bernie Sanders supporter because he said that the GOP was actively trying to kill people through their health care plan. But we'll get to that in just a second. So, last Sunday, this leads up to the main event, folks. That has all been the potatoes. Now we get to the meat. So, in reaction to the people telling her just to move on, AOC went on to Instagram last Sunday, and she did an Instagram live stream where she said that she is a survivor of sexual abuse. Which means that when people like Josh Hawley or Ted Cruz or whoever tells her to quote-unquote move on, they are engaged in the exact same tactics that sexual abusers use to control their victims. Now, let me make one thing perfectly clear. Or actually a couple of things perfectly clear. Number one, AOC offered absolutely zero, count them, zero details about this supposed sexual assault or sexual assaults that were perpetrated against her. She didn't give a location, didn't give a date, didn't even give a time in her life. Like, oh, when I was, at Boston College, or, oh, one night, when I was working as a bartender out in wherever in New York City that she worked at. Didn't give any sort of details, not even any soft, fluffy details like that. Just sort of a time frame for it. So that's number one. Number two, this is the first time that anything like this has ever been suggested by AOC. Up until last Sunday, no one Not AOC herself, not any of her staff, not any of her family, not anyone who knows her or who has interviewed her has ever suggested anything remotely as what she claimed last Sunday. No one, it has never been known that AOC is the survivor of sexual assault. Nothing. That was literally a bolt of lightning from a blue sky, which this might be a little controversial, gang, but stay with me here. This leads me to the belief that there are only 1 to 2 conclusions about this. Number 1, AOC is either a cock-eyed liar and she just made up that story whole cloth to score political points against Ted Cruz. Or 2, she is the survivor of sexual abuse, in which case, she has my sympathy, definitely. No one should have to live through that, go through that, or anything like that. But if she is actually a survivor of sexual abuse, then that means that she very cunningly, very calculatingly hid that detail of her life. More than likely, specifically so that she could keep it as an ace up her sleeve to play it at just such an opportune moment. Because the timing of this, gang, makes my spider sense go off like nobody's business. Think about it. At a time when she is actually getting pushback, from a lot of people saying you overstepped your boundaries, saying that Ted Cruz was trying to get you murdered. And especially when Cruz and Hawley themselves have not been backing down. If you've noticed, since January 6th, she has been harping about Hawley and Cruz, as many people on the left have, saying they need to resign, they need to be censored, this, and this. Cruz and Hawley, meanwhile, they have not caved. The usual Republican reaction would be to grovel, to shrivel up into a ball, and basically beg and plead and ask for forgiveness and say, oh please, don't hate me, I'll apologize. They would have to apologize probably 10 times a day. You know how Muslims have to pray 5 times a day while facing in the direction of Mecca? Most Republicans, if they had been accused of the things, or if they had faced the verbal assault that AOC has launched against Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley, they would feel that they would have to apologize 5 times a day for the rest of their lives in order to be sufficiently clean enough to still serve in Washington, D.C. Cruz and Hawley haven't done that. They haven't caved. They haven't shriveled up. They've actually pushed back. They've basically said, get a life. Move on, especially when you remember, gang, that AOC wasn't even in the Capitol when the storming happened. She was in her office, which means she was in the whatever building. I forget the name of it off the top of my head, but it's across the street from the Capitol. She wasn't even in the same building that the rioters were supposedly storming. It's true that the building was evacuated, but there wasn't any real panic. There wasn't really any, oh my gosh, this is imminent. We gotta move, people. It was, we've seen videos of it. It's pretty nonchalant, pretty okay. We gotta move, keep it going. But it's not in the death throes of panic like you see in all those disaster movies. So when people brought that up, when Cruz and Hawley brought that up, that is when this claim of sexual assault manifested itself like magic, like a magic trick that David Copperfield or Penn and Teller would do, just poof, out of thin air. Oh, by the way, I'm the survivor of sexual assault, and so if you tell me to move on, you're actually doing the same thing that sexual abusers do. And that is the key point of this story, gang. That was the line of logic that AOC was wanting her audience to make. I'm the survivor of sexual assault. Sexual abusers, do these sort of tactics in order to maintain control of their victim. Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley and anyone else who pushes back against me, tells me to move on, etc., 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 are utilizing the same tactics that those abusers use. The conclusion, therefore, is Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley, and anyone else in that camp, is just as evil, just as horrible, just as bad as a sexual abuser. That was the line of logic that she laid out. And that's the line of logic that a lot of people had lapped up. And what is so horrifying about that, gang, is that this honestly is the emotionalization of evidence. We saw the first act of this actually back in 2018 again, when Brett Kavanaugh was before the Senate for his confirmation hearings to the Supreme Court. Remember Christina Blasey Ford, who accused Kavanaugh of trying to sexually assault her when they were both in college at a college party? And remember that there was absolutely no evidence to back that up. The FBI did another background check into Kavanaugh, and they said he's clean. We can't find any evidence for this claim. They actually brought in trial lawyers, trial attorneys who are experts at cross-examining witnesses, and it quickly became apparent that Christina Blasey Ford could not answer basic questions like, okay, when was the party? Where was it held? How did you get the party? How long were you there? When did you leave? How come you actually never filed a police report about this? And Ford could not answer, but it didn't matter. If you cast your minds back, gang, you will remember that people on the left, our sitting current Vice President, Kamala, whatever, Harris, said that the seriousness of the accusations themselves are enough for Kavanaugh's confirmation to be scuttled. In other words, the seriousness of the accusations themselves, okay? We don't need evidence. The seriousness of the accusations themselves are enough that if Brett Kavanaugh had any human decency, he would rescind himself, he would pull out of his nomination, and if he didn't have the decency to do that, then if anyone here in this Senate, besides the people on the left, of course, had any decency, they would vote him down. It didn't matter that there was no evidence. All that mattered was that Christina Blasey Ford, who was politically feminine. That's a word we're going to hear more and more often, to use the term, the asinine term that was coined by Nicole Hannah-Jones, the brain trust behind the 1619 Project, when she said that to be fully black, you have to be racially black and politically black, i.e. you have to agree hook, line, and sinker with everything that the left says. But since Christina Blasey Ford was politically a woman, politically feminine, meaning she was on the left, then the accusation of the charges were enough for everyone to believe her, especially when you add that to the Me Too movement, which says that asinine phrase, believe all women. Well, no, we don't believe anyone unless they have the evidence. That's what we're supposed to do, especially when it comes to courts of law and government. My home state is Missouri. The state motto is show me. Missouri is the show me state. It's where's the evidence? That's a nice story. That's a nice claim. Where's your evidence to back it up? AOC then, with this claim, this whole Instagram live video and everything like that, gang, this is the second act of that. Because what AOC is saying is that she doesn't need to provide those pesky details about her supposed sexual assault. She doesn't need to do any of that. In fact, asking for that evidence means that you don't believe her, which means that you are oppressing her, which means that you are part of the enemy and part of the problem, like Cruz and Hawley. This is why I said at the very beginning of this video that one of the perfect analogies for our world today is the mad trial. The mad trial that the Red Queen, the Queen of Hearts, was holding against Alice, it wasn't being run on any sort of logic that we could identify with, no sense of rationality or anything. It's whatever was made up by the Queen of Hearts to get what she wanted, which was, coincidentally, Alice's head. That's what's going on here. If you emotionalize logic, then that means that you are on a bed of sand. Nothing matters except what the ruling powers want. And what that also means is that you have absolutely no way to defend yourself. You have absolutely no way to defend yourself. You could bring up a mountain load, a Mount Everest of evidence, and it wouldn't matter because the seriousness of the charges are enough to already state that to already let the powers that be decide that you are guilty. That is what's being normalized here. AOC took another step in normalizing that this past Sunday, bringing us closer to making us Alice in Wonderland. That is story number one.